The worst day of your life rarely announces itself when you wake up, I thought as I stared at the email glowing on my computer screen. The words were short, professional, cold. After 4 years of loyalty, countless overtime hours, and weekends sacrificed for deadlines, my employment had been terminated effective immediately. I read the message 3 times before it finally felt real. Around me, the office continued moving as though nothing had happened.
Phones rang.
Keyboards clicked. People walked past carrying coffee cups and discussing meetings. The world kept spinning while mine quietly stopped. I lowered my hand to my stomach. The gesture had become automatic over the past few weeks. Protective. Instinctive. I was 28 years old, 6 months pregnant, and suddenly unemployed. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the downtown Chicago office, reflecting off polished glass walls and chrome fixtures. Everything looked expensive, successful, impressive. Yet sitting there with tears threatening to form behind my eyes, it all felt hollow. My manager appeared beside my desk a few minutes later. He avoided direct eye contact. That hurt more than the email. "Claire," he said quietly, "Human Resources will explain the details." I nodded because I no longer trusted my voice. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. 4 years reduced to a folder, a final paycheck, and a rehearsed apology. By noon, I was standing outside the building holding a cardboard box filled with personal belongings. A framed photograph, a notebook, a coffee mug with a faded motivational quote. The wind tugged at my coat as people rushed around me on the busy sidewalk. Nobody noticed the woman whose future had just collapsed. Nobody knew how carefully I had planned everything. The nursery, the savings account, the doctor appointments, the tiny clothes folded neatly inside a dresser at home. I had spent months preparing for a child. I had never prepared to lose my livelihood. I began walking without any real destination. The city blurred around me. Yellow taxis rolled past. Traffic lights changed from red to green. Storefront windows reflected my exhausted expression. Eventually, I stopped outside a small cafe. Warm light glowed behind the glass. For a moment, I considered going inside. Then I remembered my budget. Every dollar mattered now. I turned away. That was when I noticed the black sedan parked across the street. It stood out immediately. Elegant. Immaculate. Expensive enough to attract attention without trying. A tall man stepped from the rear passenger door. Dark tailored coat. Sharp posture. Dark hair touched by sunlight. The kind of presence that made people unconsciously move aside. I only looked for a second before continuing down the sidewalk. He was just another wealthy businessman. Another stranger. Another person living in a world completely separate from mine. Yet something strange happened. As I passed the intersection, I felt observed. Not threatened. Not judged. Observed. I glanced back. The man stood near the cafe entrance speaking quietly to someone. Then his gaze lifted. Directly toward me. Ice blue eyes. Calm. Focused. Unreadable. For a moment, the noise of the city seemed distant. Cars. Voices. Sirens. Everything faded behind that brief exchange. Then a pedestrian crossed between us. The moment broke. I looked away first and continued walking. By the time I reached the next block, I told myself I was imagining things. Yet I could not shake the feeling. Somehow on the same day I lost everything, a stranger had noticed me. And deep down, I had the unsettling sense that our paths were about to cross again. The day dragged on with a quiet heaviness as Claire Thompson walked down the crowded streets, carrying the small box of belongings from the office. Her steps were slow but deliberate, each one measured to keep her balance as her growing belly shifted with each movement. Cars honked and people rushed past, their chatter blending into a low hum that filled the city air. Yet none of them noticed her struggle or the weight of her situation. She passed cafes, boutique shops, and small office buildings, the sunlight reflecting off the glass windows and casting patterns across the sidewalk. Her mind replayed the morning repeatedly, the curt email, the cold apology, the manager's averted gaze. She had prepared for a new life, a child she longed for, and now everything seemed to crumble within minutes. Her hands instinctively rested on her stomach, tracing gentle circles in an effort to calm herself. Eventually, she found herself in a small park, the green of the grass and the swaying of trees offering a brief reprieve from the chaos of the city. She sat on a bench, the cardboard box beside her, and allowed herself a single deep breath. The moment was fleeting because movement across the sidewalk caught her eye. A sleek black sedan rolled to a stop near the curb, tinted windows reflecting the afternoon light. A man stepped from the car, tall, impeccably dressed in a dark tailored suit with a long overcoat, his posture precise, movements deliberate. He observed the park casually at first, then his gaze locked onto her. Ice blue eyes. Calm. Calculated. Observant. He did not approach immediately. Instead, he remained a silent figure, his presence registering without intrusion, creating a subtle weight in the air around her. Claire felt the faintest shiver, not of fear but of awareness, a sense that someone powerful had noted her existence. She adjusted the strap of her bag, hoping she had imagined it, yet the feeling persisted as she watched him retreat behind the parked car before returning to his sedan. The city noises resumed their dominance, but the impression lingered, a quiet signal that her life, already fragile and uncertain, was intersecting with someone who could see her circumstances clearly. She stood, dusted off her coat, and continued walking, each step heavy with contemplation. Questions formed in her mind. Why had he noticed her? Who was he? And most importantly, how had he seen what no one else seemed to recognize? As she crossed an intersection, the sunlight fell across the street, illuminating the sedan parked ahead. For a split second, their eyes met through the reflection of the glass, and Claire felt a strange, almost magnetic pull, a sense that this brief encounter would not be the last, that her path and the man in the suit's path were destined to cross again, and that her life, complicated and fragile as it was, might be about to change in ways she could not yet imagine. By the time Claire Thompson reached her small apartment, the late afternoon sun had softened to a golden glow that spilled across the worn wooden floor and illuminated the narrow hallway. She set the cardboard box containing her office belongings gently onto the counter, her hands trembling slightly as the weight of the day pressed down on her shoulders. The faint hum of the city outside, distant traffic, the occasional siren, voices from neighboring apartments, contrasted sharply with the stillness inside her apartment, offering a momentary reprieve from the chaos of her emotions. She sank into the small armchair by the window, rubbing her temples, and traced a hand along the swell of her belly as she tried to steady her thoughts. She thought of the black sedan she had seen earlier, the tall man with the tailored coat and ice blue eyes, and the strange sensation that someone powerful had observed her without interference, quietly noting her struggle. The thought both unsettled and intrigued her, a mixture of caution and curiosity stirring within her. She stood to open the window, letting the warm breeze drift in and ruffle her hair, and watched the city move on without noticing her. Hours passed in muted reflection as she unpacked small items from the box, her favorite notebook, a framed photograph, a coffee mug that smelled faintly of home, and arranged them carefully on shelves and the countertop, each item a small anchor to normalcy she desperately wished to hold. The apartment, small and modest, felt suffocating yet familiar, a reminder that she had a life to preserve even as everything at her workplace had shifted dramatically. Later, she moved to the kitchen to prepare a simple meal, her movements deliberate, almost meditative, each chop of vegetables, each stir of the pot grounding her in the present while her thoughts kept returning to the stranger from the sedan. She imagined him sitting calmly in the shadows of the city streets, silently watching the world unfold, and felt a peculiar combination of fear, intrigue, and faint reassurance. The day gave way to evening as the city lights began to flicker on, the soft glow from street lamps blending with the amber light streaming through her windows. She perched on the counter, wrapping her arms around her belly, and allowed herself a deep, steadying breath, contemplating how a chance encounter or a brief observation by someone she had never met could unsettle and yet silently protect her at the same time. As twilight deepened, she thought about her uncertain future, the baby, her livelihood, the choices she would have to make. And yet, beneath the worry, there lingered a small spark of hope, a quiet possibility that life, in ways she could not yet foresee, might offer a chance for stability, for care, and for the subtle presence of someone who might change her path without demanding it, quietly observing, waiting, and shaping the days to come. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight, and the distant sound of traffic drifting through Claire Thompson's apartment window. For the first time since losing her job, She woke before her alarm without the familiar rush of preparing for work. The realization hit her seconds later. There was nowhere she needed to be. No office waiting downtown. No meetings. No deadlines. Just uncertainty. She sat up slowly and rested a hand against her stomach. The baby shifted gently beneath her palm. The small movement grounded her. "We will figure it out," she whispered. The words sounded stronger than she felt. After a simple breakfast, she opened her laptop and began searching for jobs. Hour after hour passed beneath the soft glow of the kitchen light. Applications, resumes, cover letters. Every position seemed to require long hours, immediate availability, or conditions that no longer fit her situation. By noon, frustration settled heavily across her shoulders. She closed the laptop and stared through the apartment window. Across the city skyline, glass towers reflected sunlight like mirrors. Somewhere among those buildings was the office she had devoted 4 years to. Somewhere inside, people were continuing their day as though she had never existed. The thought stung more than she wanted to admit. Her phone buzzed suddenly against the countertop. Claire frowned. The number was unfamiliar. For a moment she considered ignoring it. Then curiosity won. "Hello," she answered cautiously. "Miss Thompson." The voice belonged to an older woman. Professional. Polite. "My name is Margaret Hayes. I represent Hayes Community Foundation." Claire blinked in confusion. "I am sorry. I think you have the wrong number." "Actually, I do not." The woman sounded warm. Reassuring. "We recently received your information and would like to invite you for a meeting regarding an employment opportunity." Claire sat down slowly. "An employment opportunity?" "Yes. One with flexible hours and full maternity accommodations." Her heart skipped. Opportunities like that did not simply appear. Not after the week she had experienced. Not after dozens of unanswered applications. "May I ask how you found me?" A brief pause followed. "A referral." Claire waited for more. None came. The woman simply provided an address and suggested a meeting the following morning. After ending the call, Claire remained seated for several minutes staring at the phone. Something about the conversation felt unusual. Yet everything had sounded legitimate, professional, respectful. For the first time in days, a fragile sense of hope appeared. The following afternoon, she arrived at the address Margaret had provided. The building stood near the riverfront, elegant without being intimidating. Sunlight reflected across the glass entrance doors. Inside, the lobby felt welcoming rather than corporate. Soft lighting, comfortable furniture, fresh flowers arranged near the reception desk. Claire immediately noticed the difference. Nobody looked at her stomach with concern or judgment. Nobody appeared uncomfortable. A receptionist greeted her with a smile and guided her toward a private office. As Claire followed, she passed a large conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Her steps slowed unexpectedly. Someone stood inside. Tall, dark suit, hands clasped behind his back as he gazed across the skyline. Even before he turned, she recognized him. The same man from the black sedan. The same calm presence. The same ice-blue eyes. Julian Moretti. Their gazes met through the glass for only a second, yet the moment felt strangely familiar, as though neither of them was surprised. Then he gave the slightest nod before returning his attention to the city beyond the windows. And for reasons she could not explain, Claire suddenly wondered if the opportunity waiting behind the next door had never been an accident at all. Claire Thompson followed the receptionist down a quiet hallway lined with framed photographs and large windows overlooking the river. Sunlight reflected across polished floors, creating ribbons of gold that stretched toward the office door ahead. Her pulse quickened with every step. Nothing about this place felt ordinary. It felt intentional, thoughtful, almost as if someone had designed every detail to make people feel welcome. The receptionist stopped outside a spacious office and smiled warmly. "Miss Hayes is waiting for you." Claire nodded and stepped inside. Margaret Hayes rose from behind a desk and greeted her immediately. She appeared to be in her 60s, elegant and composed, with kind eyes that softened the room. The interview felt different from any Claire had experienced before. There were no uncomfortable questions. No subtle judgment. No concern hidden behind corporate language. Margaret asked about her experience, her goals, and what kind of environment would help her succeed. For the first time in weeks, Claire felt seen as a person instead of a problem. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. By the end, Margaret closed the folder resting on her desk and smiled. "I think you would be an excellent addition to our organization." Claire blinked. "Really?" Margaret nodded. "Flexible schedule. Full benefits. Maternity support. Paid leave." Claire stared for several seconds. The offer sounded too good to be real. "You have not even checked my references yet." Margaret's smile widened slightly. "We already have." A strange feeling settled in Claire's chest. The same feeling she had experienced since seeing the black sedan. Since noticing the man with the ice blue eyes. Something invisible seemed to be moving pieces around her life. Carefully, deliberately, she signed the paperwork before she could overthink it. When the meeting finally ended, relief washed through her so suddenly that she nearly felt lightheaded. For days she had been carrying fear like a weight attached to her ribs. Now for the first time she could breathe. The receptionist escorted her back toward the lobby. As they approached the conference room, Claire glanced through the glass wall again. Julian Moretti was still there. He stood beside the window overlooking the river, one hand resting in his pocket. Sunlight illuminated the sharp lines of his dark suit and reflected softly in his pale blue eyes. This time he turned before she looked away. Their gazes met directly. Neither spoke. Neither moved. Yet something passed between them. Recognition. Curiosity. Understanding. The receptionist continued walking, forcing Claire to follow. By the time she reached the lobby, she almost convinced herself not to think about him anymore. Then she stepped outside. A cool breeze drifted off the river. She paused near the entrance and pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. "Congratulations on the new job." The voice came from behind her. Calm. Deep. Familiar. Claire turned. Julian stood a few feet away. Up close, his presence felt even more powerful. Not intimidating. Certain. Like someone completely comfortable with controlling every situation around him. "Thank you," she said carefully. "I suppose I should be celebrating." One corner of his mouth moved slightly. Almost a smile. "You should." Silence followed. Not awkward silence. The kind that felt deliberate. Claire studied him for a moment. "Have we met before?" Julian's eyes held hers steadily. "No." The answer was immediate. Honest. Yet somehow incomplete. "Then why do I feel like you already know who I am?" For the first time something changed in his expression. Not surprise. Amusement. Very slight. Very controlled. He glanced toward the river before looking back at her. Because some people are impossible not to notice. Claire felt her heartbeat stumble. Before she could respond, a black sedan pulled to the curb beside them. The rear door opened. Julian stepped back. "Good luck, Claire." Then he entered the vehicle. Moments later the car disappeared. Into downtown traffic. Claire remained standing on the sidewalk long after it was gone, replaying his final words. And for reasons she could not explain, she had the growing suspicion that the new life she had just been offered was connected to him far more than anyone was willing to admit. The following day, Claire Thompson arrived at the small office with a cautious optimism that she had not felt in weeks. The early morning sun reflected softly off the polished windows, casting long shadows across the lobby floor. She paused to take a deep breath before stepping inside. Adjusting her coat around her growing belly, the rhythm of her footsteps a small assertion of control amidst the uncertainty of her life. Margaret Hayes greeted her with the same warm smile as the previous day, and guided her to a private workspace with natural light streaming from the side windows. Claire could feel the energy of the space differently now, calm, organized, yet alive with subtle anticipation. She arranged her folder on the desk, each document neatly stacked, while her mind wandered back to the brief encounter with Julian Moretti, his ice blue eyes, and the impression of quiet authority that had unsettled and intrigued her simultaneously. Margaret spoke briefly about orientation, benefits, and support systems for expectant mothers, her tone reassuring and deliberate, creating an environment that seemed intentionally protective without being overwhelming. Claire listened carefully, nodding and asking questions, her confidence slowly growing with every answer that confirmed the structure and stability of her new role. After orientation, she walked through the office, noting the professional yet welcoming atmosphere, the soft hum of printers and conversations in the distance, and the feeling that here, for the first time in weeks, she was seen as capable, valued, and safe. She paused at the large windows that overlooked the river, tracing the path of sunlight across the water, and allowed herself a quiet smile. A notification ping on her phone drew her attention, and she saw a message from an unknown number. "Welcome aboard, Claire. G." Her breath caught slightly, a shiver of recognition running through her. "Julian." The message was brief, simple, yet it carried weight. It was not a command, not an order, not even a question. It was a signal. She glanced down at her belly and whispered, "We will manage." The day progressed with Claire meeting new colleagues, learning the details of her responsibilities, and slowly understanding the workflow and culture of her position. She felt capable, present, and for the first time in a long while, she imagined a life that could sustain her and her child. By late afternoon, the office had quieted, the hum of activity softened, and sunlight angled low, bathing the space in amber hues. Claire returned to the window to glance at the city skyline and felt a strange sense of anticipation, a quiet certainty that her life was beginning a new chapter. And there, in the distance, across the river and streets below, she caught sight of a sleek black sedan parked at a familiar corner. Julian Moretti's figure emerged briefly from the car, and their eyes met for a moment. No words were exchanged, no gestures made. Yet the connection felt palpable, unspoken, and deliberate. The presence of someone who saw her, acknowledged her, and remained an invisible guardian settled over her like a protective cloak. She turned back into the office with renewed determination, a small smile tugging at her lips, carrying the sense that although her past had been tumultuous, the path ahead was carefully unfolding, and for the first time she felt she was not alone. The following morning, Claire Thompson arrived at the office with a sense of quiet determination, the cool autumn sunlight casting long reflections across the polished lobby floor. Her coat was buttoned neatly, and she rested one hand lightly against her belly, a small gesture of reassurance to herself and the child she carried. The receptionist greeted her with a warm smile, and as Claire followed her down the hallway, the subtle hum of activity within the office created a calm, professional rhythm that seemed designed to ease nerves. Margaret Hayes waited in the same private workspace, offering an encouraging nod as Claire entered. The room smelled faintly of coffee and fresh flowers, and the light streaming in highlighted the neat arrangement of folders and documents on the desk. Claire took a seat and arranged her own papers, the order giving her a small sense of control over her otherwise unpredictable life. Margaret outlined the day's schedule, emphasizing support systems and accommodations for expectant mothers, her tone calm and methodical, designed to instill confidence. Claire listened intently, occasionally asking questions and nodding, each response reinforcing the notion that she could handle this new role and the responsibilities that came with it. Mid-morning, she was escorted to meet her new colleagues, passing through open workspaces where people moved efficiently, yet warmly, exchanging greetings and small smiles. Every glance seemed free of judgment, a stark contrast to the scrutiny she had endured in her previous workplace. As she walked through the office, the large windows offered a panoramic view of the city, the river glinting in the sunlight like a ribbon of silver. She paused, reflecting on how drastically her life had shifted over the past week, from sudden unemployment to a position offering stability and dignity. Her phone buzzed lightly in her pocket, and she retrieved it to find a short message. "Glad to see you settled in. G." A shiver ran down her spine at the familiar initials. Julian Moretti. The simple words conveyed awareness, subtle reassurance, and power without direct contact. Claire tucked the phone away, letting a small smile form despite herself. She spent the remainder of the morning organizing her desk, familiarizing herself with office procedures, and slowly becoming comfortable in the rhythm of her new environment. By lunchtime, the soft golden light of the sun filled the office, and Claire glanced through the window once more, catching the faint outline of a black sedan parked nearby. Julian stood briefly outside, his posture calm and controlled, his ice blue eyes scanning the surroundings before he entered the vehicle and disappeared into traffic. A sense of calm and safety settled over her, knowing someone capable and observant watched over her without interference, quietly shaping the circumstances that allowed her to rebuild. The afternoon passed in a similar cadence, punctuated by quiet accomplishments, successful conversations with new colleagues, and the occasional glance at the windows as if expecting to see the man again. By evening, Claire sat back in her chair, letting a deep, steadying breath release the tension of the day. The office was bathed in amber light from the setting sun, the city skyline glowing warmly in the distance. A gentle sense of control, protection, and renewed hope enveloped her, a feeling that her life, fragile and uncertain a week ago, was beginning to settle into a pattern where trust, competence, and subtle guidance had started to create a safe, promising path forward. She allowed herself to imagine a future where stability and the quiet watchfulness of someone like Julian Moretti might coexist, not as a threat, but as an invisible hand guiding the pieces into place, creating a life that was not only bearable but hopeful. Late afternoon settled over the city, casting long golden streaks across the office windows, and Claire Thompson paused near her desk, taking a slow, deliberate breath. The soft hum of computers and distant chatter from colleagues created a calm background that contrasted sharply with the whirlwind of the past week. She organized her notes, adjusting the order of folders with precision, finding a small sense of control in the routine. Her hand instinctively rested on her growing belly, tracing gentle circles as she considered how drastically her life had shifted. One moment she had been unemployed, uncertain of her future, and now she held the potential for stability and respect in her new role. The memory of Julian Moretti lingered in her mind, the man with the ice-blue eyes whose presence had seemed to observe and guide events without overt interference. As she glanced toward the large windows that overlooked the river, the sunlight caught the reflections of glass and water, creating a tapestry of light across the office floor. Her phone vibrated softly on the desk, and she retrieved it to see a brief message. "The day is yours. Oji." A shiver ran through her, mixture of recognition and curiosity. The message was simple, deliberate, and unintrusive, echoing the same quiet power she had observed before. She tucked the phone into her coat pocket, allowing herself to feel a small spark of reassurance. Hours passed with Claire attending meetings, learning internal procedures, and meeting colleagues, each interaction reinforcing a sense of normalcy and acceptance that had eluded her in her previous employment. The office environment felt deliberate, protective yet non-intrusive, as though every detail had been arranged to ensure her comfort and focus. Mid-afternoon sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting stripes of light and shadow across her workspace. She glanced toward the window again, catching the distant outline of a sleek black sedan parked near the office entrance. Julian stood briefly outside, scanning the surroundings, before retreating into the vehicle. The sense of being watched was not oppressive but oddly reassuring, an invisible layer of security woven into the fabric of her day. Claire allowed herself to pause and consider how life had begun to shift under these subtle forces, the intertwining of care, protection, and trust creating a fragile but growing sense of stability. By early evening, the golden glow softened into amber, and she took a final moment at the window, looking out across the cityscape with a quiet resolve. Though uncertainty had not vanished completely, she felt the first genuine sense of possibility, of a life shaped not only by her choices but by the quiet, unseen presence of someone powerful who understood the stakes, observed without intruding, and offered guidance through mere awareness. For the first time in days she could imagine the future unfolding with care, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the office seemed to hold a gentle promise, a protective space where Claire could breathe, plan, and slowly reclaim her life under the watchful, subtle influence of Julian Moretti. Several weeks later, the city looked different to Claire Thompson, not because the buildings had changed or the traffic had slowed, but because fear no longer colored every corner of her future. Morning sunlight poured through the office windows, washing the workspace in warm gold as she settled into her desk with a quiet confidence she barely recognized in herself. The uncertainty that had followed her after losing her job had gradually given way to something steadier. Hope. She reviewed reports, answered emails, and exchanged easy conversations with colleagues who valued her contributions rather than questioning her circumstances. Every day felt like another small step toward rebuilding the life she wanted for herself and her child. Around noon, Margaret Hayes stopped by her office carrying a folder and a smile. "You have become one of the best decisions this foundation has made all year," she said warmly. Claire laughed softly, still unused to receiving praise without suspicion attached to it. After Margaret left, Claire found herself staring out the window toward the river. The water shimmered beneath the autumn sun. Boats drifted slowly across the surface. The city moved with its usual energy. Yet beneath the ordinary scene, she felt something extraordinary. Stability. For months she had worried about providing for her child. Now she had meaningful work, supportive people around her, and a future that no longer felt fragile. Later that afternoon, as she exited the building, a familiar black sedan waited across the street. Her heart immediately recognized it before her mind did. The vehicle remained parked beneath a row of golden-leaved trees. A moment later, the rear door opened and Julian Moretti stepped out. He wore a dark coat against the cool air, his posture as composed as ever. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. They simply stood facing one another while pedestrians flowed around them. The city seemed strangely quiet despite the traffic. Claire smiled first. "You knew, did not you?" she asked. Julian tilted his head slightly. "Knew what?" She folded her arms gently. "That I needed help." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I knew someone was treating you unfairly." Claire looked down briefly before meeting his eyes again. The job, the foundation, all of it. A faint breeze stirred the leaves overhead. Julian glanced toward the river. Opportunities still require people brave enough to accept them. The answer told her everything without confirming anything. She smiled despite herself. Typical Julian. Never taking credit. Never explaining more than necessary. Yet she understood now. Some people changed lives by stepping into the spotlight. Others changed lives quietly from the shadows. They stood together for a moment longer beneath the afternoon sun. Then Claire rested a hand over her stomach and felt a gentle movement from within. Her smile widened. Julian noticed immediately. For the first time since she had met him, a genuine smile appeared on his face. Small, rare, real. "Looks like someone approves," Claire said softly. Julian's eyes lowered briefly before returning to hers. "Smart kid." She laughed. The sound felt lighter than it had in months. As traffic moved through the city and sunlight reflected across the river, Claire realized something important. The worst day of her life had led her here. Not because losing everything had been fair. Not because pain carried some hidden reward. But because sometimes one act of quiet kindness can redirect an entire future. And as Julian stepped back toward the waiting sedan, Claire no longer saw a powerful stranger who had changed her life. She saw the man who had noticed her when everyone else looked away. The man who had offered dignity when the world offered judgment. The man who proved that real strength is not measured by power alone, but by what you choose to protect.